Hey everyone, this
We're
is
back.
Jack's boss again with Jeff. Great to have you back, Jeff. And
No,
it
all
looks
good
like
cheers.
your computer's doing better than mine right now.
Which is upsetting because my computer's had nothing but issues for weeks. It's 9 years old this year, so
Well, that's doing quite well.
I tried to make it as future-proof as possible at the time by giving it the top of the line stuff, which means that by now it's really low range stuff. But hey, it works.
Oh
So,
yeah. Yeah, that's
and I
the
was
that's the
about to build a
drawback.
new one. But obviously the whole graphics chip shortage and or graphics cards, in general, get shooting up in price and crypto mining. Maybe I won't be. Maybe I won't be just yet. Not until
All
graphics
right.
cards come down. But anyway, we're already way off track.
Yes, we are.
Hi, everyone.
Welcome to Why the Clone Wars Doesn't Fit into the EU Part 2.
I can hear the comments typing already.
We actually didn't have very many. I was surprised. Cal was one, and then we had one other guy make like 3 comments, and I was like, oh, okay. I was expecting more.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's no news is good news, right?
Well, actually, there was another guy, but they like YouTube just like removed his stuff because it was annoying.
Oh my!
The way he was commenting, it was very Spanish.
Oh, good, excellent.
Yeah, so
I've seen those. Yeah, I've seen those comments.
Yeah, the other guy's commenting like it's live, and I'm like, okay, you should really like give context to what you're saying, because we don't know when you're while you're watching the video, when you're commenting. We don't know. For all we know, you just started watching it, or you're at the end and you're commenting somewhere towards the middle. We don't know.
Man,
Yeah, so please bear that in mind, people. Please bear that in mind.
This is not live.
Yes. When this is live, I will have more money.
Also, if we end up, can you imagine we just stream this straight to like one of the larger Facebook groups or something? Then you'd get some comments. Then you'd get some interaction.
Oh man, there are a couple of Facebook groups. I think one of Cal's actually would probably allow us to do this.
Yeah, but the comments would start immediately.
Oh man, they'd be commenting like, so
what do you mean it doesn't fit?
We would lose track of where we were going.
Yeah,
which is bad enough for us, because we get off track so fast.
Yep, particularly with this topic, people just get really, I don't know, really into it. Which I know it sounds funny for me to say when I'm on a video talking about it as well, but it just seems to be one of those things that people just really, really love covering and talking about, and discussing and arguing about over and over, and they've got really, really strong feelings on it.
Oh yeah.
If you picked another, I don't know, random novel, Tatooine Ghost, and you decided to discuss the events of Tatooine Ghost, it'd be pretty sedate. Everyone's going to have a few opinions. Oh, yeah. Maybe they liked it, maybe they didn't. Certain characters stood out, whatever. But it'd be pretty sedate. And this is the one topic that when you bring it up, suddenly it's just really divisive. But anyway.
Well, the Clone Wars is a very divisive topic. And that's why I chose it. I wanted to see how much people would be willing to defend or support our position on this.
I already know the limits that people on both sides will go to, and it's a lot.
Oh, I know. So today we're mainly going to be talking about the timeline and how the show has messed with the timeline. Yeah. So if we go off of so Jeff, you are well aware of the initial timeline. You're probably better aware of it than I am. The order of events. And
I think, as I actually touched on in the previous video, it was it was the first time I'd seen a timeline that was this in depth. Every other part of the EU is more or less designated in terms of years. Like this happened in 40 BBY, this happened in 22 ABY, and that's just in terms of it happened within this year, and you've got 12 or whatever months, depending on what system you're in. Right. But you've got this large period of time where it might have happened. You know, like did this particular battle happen in the equivalent of January or the equivalent of December? We don't really know. We're just given a year. And then from the outset, the multimedia project, whether it was the novels or the comics, I think the first couple of issues just said shortly after the Battle of Geonosis, but by the time you get 4 or 5 issues in, it starts saying 2 months after the Battle of Geonosis, 3 months after the battle. Like it's months. It is broken down in terms of months. Some of them are half. Some of them are like 3.5 months after or whatever. Like it's really precise in terms of what's happening. And then the novels as well, when the first of the Clone Wars Multimedia Project novels started to drop, they had the same thing. They had a timeline in front, and that timeline even incorporated things like the Young Boba Fett series of junior novels, which didn't have their own timeline. But then if you picked up Shatterpoint, in the front, apart from George Lucas clearly writing a lovely write-up on the Clone Wars, pre-Clone Wars Filoni, apart from that, it has it's this breakdown again of 1 month, 2 months, 2.5 months, 3 months, and it's including the game. So we had the Clone Wars game at the time. It's including the junior novels. Yeah, the junior novels, the comics, the adult novels, obviously, and then eventually incorporating the TV series episodes and everything. But it was incredibly in depth, down to the month, down to the half month in some cases, down to the days. What is it? It's at the end of. I can't remember what it was now. I think it's there's that. Mental blank. I think it's the Battle of Jabim, isn't it? Which is broken down into like days.
Oh, like yeah, it had to be.
Yeah, and I think it's when you crack open the beginning of every issue, it has to be. Yeah, it has to be the Battle of Jabim. When you open up every issue, it kind of starts with like 52 days or 36 days or whatever it is. Like there's in the final issue where you got Anakin, it opens with Anakin going across on his speeder. And it's, like you can tell at this point, it's been like a month and a bit or 5 weeks or whatever the case may be. But yeah, it's just like, this has been a long time that they've been in this one battle, and it's broken down into days, which we've never seen.
Oh yeah. It's one of very few things.
Yeah. I mean, even the movies, even the original trilogy movies, there are still discussions over, say, how long Empire Strikes Back actually took. How long did it take Han to limp over to find Lando? How long was Luke actually on Dagobah training? Like these things still come up in discussions because there was never any Empire Strikes Back took 7 days. There was never anything like that from Lucasfilm. It was just, it happened in this year. And you go from there.
Figure out the timeline yourself.
Yeah, that's it. Whatever you want to do. And I guess it also gave them at the time an awful lot of freedom as well, because, if you said that Empire Strikes Back took part in this year, and then you want to write a comic that takes part around that, you don't have to think to yourself, oh goodness, we've run out of months. There's no months left in between these other stories. So it gave them a lot of freedom in terms of storytelling, and that's what I liked about the Clone Wars, is that it was very locked down, which gave us I guess an incredible timeline to look at. It was almost like an historical document, like you're looking at the battles of World War II or World War I or whatever the case may be. It was an historical document, and in terms of this happened on day 26 of the 3rd month. It's like very in depth for Star Wars, unprecedentedly so. And Filoni sort of changed that a lot.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if we just go off of the original timeline for the Clone Wars, it was very precise. You go through, you have the Battle of Geonosis, and then you have like a handful of books that take place within like 2 or 3 months after.
Yeah. Well, the same as the game. I think one of the very first things that happened was probably actually the game, where they go to like Renvar and stuff, and they're trying to track down the Dark Reaper, and they're trying to track that down. That was like in the first couple of weeks, and again, even the game breaks it down in terms of weeks and what's happening. And then, as you say, there was the novels, which are directly afterwards and stuff. And it's really in depth.
Yeah, and then you get into the comics, which I want to say they start I want to say the first one starts like 2 months after Geonosis. The first one, it's like you're like, okay, we are like in the thick of the war here.
yeah. So I was about to say 2 months. I got as far as 2. So I think you're correct. I think you're definitely correct that the first comic is. I could go grab it, but
I know, right?
There
like,
it is.
It's for me. It's the other direction. It's like it's right over there.
If anyone's interested,
I just don't want to take the time to get up. I already have volumes 5 to 8 on my lap.
All I've got is a bunch of figures. I really should change that. I should bring some books over here. Anyway. Well, but yeah, no, I think you're right. The comics start 2 months in.
Yeah.
Again, don't quote us on that, but I'm pretty sure that's where they start. Which
2 or 3,
ironically,
it's not terribly far off.
Yeah. And in all irony, isn't 2 months kind of what Filoni ended up giving for the entire conflict in the Multimedia project?
Right. Like they ended up cutting the Multimedia project down to 2 months. Everything that happens before Anakin's knighthood is essentially broken down into 2 months. But then we have the armor discrepancy with that. Because the armor transitions about a handful of months before Anakin's knighthood in the Multimedia project.
Yep.
It's like almost half a year. It's like you're gonna I just don't get that. It's like,
look, they had production problems, all right? Just...
right. Well, I mean, I think that's part of Filoni. I think Filoni's answer to that was the ARC Trooper armor that he made, which was essentially Phase 1 armor with a helmet that was like a blend between the original Phase 1 helmet and the up-and-coming Phase 2 helmet.
Yep.
I was like, that really could have been better, but I guess that's an okay answer. I don't agree with it, but it's an answer.
out of all of the issues that arise, it's one of the ones you're like, oh.
Right. Well, and the biggest problem with that show was that there were so many episodes that were aired out of order. It they in the timeline, you've got like that whole there was like a whole Clone Squad arc, and that's like the beginning of like season 3. For half the episodes of it take place back when seasons 1 and 2 are still going. It's like, why are we
jumping around?
Why are we jumping around here?
Yeah,
like, they're just moving around the timeline and screwing. Like it screws up the whole system, because like you can connect because like you're already familiar with a couple of these characters that are in this arc because their first appearances were in the previous 2 seasons.
Yeah,
and you're like, why are you suddenly giving me this arc here?
Don't mind me, just grabbing a noisy cat.
Oh, okay.
Say hello.
See, we get to see the cats.
Hooray!
The starving kitties that
I've also got. It's also the wrong franchise. This is Kaylee, so she's the Firefly kitten.
No.
Oh no! Quick! Go away! Yeah, no, Kaylee's adorable, aren't you? Yeah. So we should do a Firefly video one day.
We should.
Yeah,
that would be a fun discussion, because anytime a Firefly video comes up, Firefly fans find it.
Yes.
It's a fact.
You can't even hide it. Even if you never publish it, even if you just record it and put it on your hard drive and then go out the back and bury your computer, a Firefly fan will come and just start digging up your computer and they'll find it. It's, yeah.
We
incredible fandom. Yeah, incredible fandom. Yeah, but no, it was, yeah, among the many issues, I guess, that the Clone Wars ended up having, apart from squashing the entire Multimedia project, was that then what was replacing it was largely a little messy in terms of its own chronology. So yeah, it was upsetting to see. Definitely upsetting to see. That's not to say that the comics didn't jump back and forth. I'm sure that there was indeed
a couple of spots.
Yeah, but I mean that's probably a normal trope of storytelling. Like you're introducing a new concept or a new idea, and so you quickly have a little flashback to show the background to that and its development, and then you come back to present day and you tell that story. So it's not a completely unreasonable trope.
The difference there is that you're entirely aware when you're reading a comic, because they always give you they let you know, hey, we're picking up where this arc left off, and it kind of runs concurrent with the arc that we just finished.
Yep.
Which is why we kind of took a break here. With the way that they did the TV show, you have the movie, and then randomly throughout the show, very randomly, they're placed very bizarrely. You have like 5 episodes across the first 3 or 4 seasons that all take place during like just prior to the movie, and you're like, wait, you picked up at the end of this battle with the movie,
and now we're revisiting,
and now we're going back to earlier parts of this battle. I don't think this was the way to do this.
I mean,
you're doing it randomly. They're not all concurrent. They're random. Like one is like episode 8 of season 1, and then another is like episode 5 of season 2 or something. I'm giving out random numbers for the record. I don't remember. It's been a while since I even watched the original 6 season. We're both in the same boat as far as the show goes.
Yeah, it's one of those things that
probably been longer for you than me, though.
Yeah. It's one of those things that annoys you at the time, and you're never going to go back. I think it's between that and Game of Thrones. They're the 2 series. I'm not going back to watch that. I mean, I know how it ends now. I'm like, no.
Right.
It somewhat soils the entire thing, and it's the same with the Clone Wars. The fact that as I either said in the last video or perhaps when we were chatting off camera, for me it was the first season was relatively all right. Oddly enough, this actually works with Game of Thrones as well. The first season was all right and seemed pretty close, and you're like, okay, we can roll with this. And then season 2 happened, like, yeah, okay, we're getting a bit wobbly, but it's mostly good. And then after that, the wheels just fall off, and it's a mess.
Definitely.
And in one franchise's cases, it no longer follows the books particularly closely, and in the other franchise's case, it just steamrolls over the books completely and erases them. So. But either way, it's not good. So you're not going back to watch that. It's like, I would much prefer, as nerdy as it might sound, but again, we are on YouTube doing a Star Wars video. So, in terms of nerdiness, we're up there.
Yeah, we're
we're pretty high. I would definitely much prefer just sit down and burn through the entire comic series again, reread the novels, probably even replay the game, because that's been a while as well.
I would love to go back to the game.
Yeah, it wasn't one of the classics for me. Like if I was to rank all my favorite Star Wars games, it is admittedly pretty low down the list, but it's still something I'd want to replay.
It has that, I don't know, there's something about that game. It just gives you the feel of the war that that Battlefront does not.
No. No, if I wanted, I mean, I guess my favorite game of the era would be Republic Commando. That probably goes without saying. That's, I guess the pinnacle of gaming for the Clone Wars era. But
that's true. That is true.
Yeah. But the Clone Wars game itself is not to be
number one, I think, as far as the Clone Wars stuff goes.
Yeah. I mean, even in terms of just Star Wars games in general, it's pretty high. So.
Oh yeah, it is. It's definitely top 10 overall, I think.
Yeah.
As the overall rating system goes, I think it's, as far as Star Wars games, I think it's at least in the top 10, might even be in the top 5. And that's if you're not counting Star Wars The Old Republic.
Oh yeah.
I wouldn't count that because it's in its own realm as far as Star Wars goes. It's the only MMO we've ever had. Well, that's widely popular.
Yeah.
We do have the
Galaxies, which
Galaxies, yeah.
Poor Galaxies.
Yeah, it was not. I always forget about that one until I say something like this about.
Like, we never had an MMO.
I'm like, oh right, we have Galaxies. I totally forget about Galaxies.
Of which apparently there are still servers out there somewhere. So
yeah,
if anyone's
there
interested,
are. So if you want to play Galaxies, you can find somebody who will. You can dig and you will find something. Get on there,
which is incredible to think of it, but there it is. Yeah,
it is amazing. Anyway, where was I going? Anyway, so
back to the timeline.
Right, back to the timeline.
We're so bad at this.
I liked the storyline that was going on at the beginning. It was very of the comics, and there are a handful of books from earlier on that I kind of wish I had read, especially what's that book? The one where Siri Tachi dies. I haven't actually read it. I know the gist of what happens.
Yeah.
But it's like it's one of the books that I'm like, I wish I'd actually read this one, because I liked her character in Jedi Apprentice, and it's like her only appearance. Well, outside of the Jedi Apprentice and Jedi Quest books.
Yeah.
That it's one of those moments where I'm like, I kind of wish I'd gotten that one.
Got into that earlier, yeah. Well, the ones that I actually wish I'd read earlier, because for some bizarre reason, I just kept overlooking the Young Boba Fett series for a long time. I don't know why. I bought them, and then they just sat there. And I don't know why that was. I guess I was just busy at the time with other things or whatever was going on. But yeah, fun and games, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know why I didn't read that, but the same thing. I mean, not that really has an enormous impact on the multimedia project at large.
No,
there are certain events, and again, it does have its own points where this novel happens and that novel happens and that novel happens. So
it doesn't, as far as that goes. Even the bounty hunter arc in the Clone Wars doesn't fully contradict that. It does a little bit. But it's not as major of a discrepancy.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. Like, that's one of the changes that's like, okay, this is easy to let slide here, but think about everything else you've destroyed.
Well, again, I guess it's for me as well. Yeah, I guess, in terms of overlooking things, that sort of stuff, we're used to it being EU fans. For decades, things either to be an old Marvel comic, that's usually where the problems were, be an old Marvel comic that didn't quite line up with the new stuff, and then somebody would write something very clever to intertwine them and that sort of thing. Or very rarely, maybe there'd be a West End Games thing where they had written down a certain fact and a novel had been written where that particular fact got overlooked, because they do sometimes. Something obscure gets overlooked, and so we're kind of used to it. But I guess, again, for something I'm sure I said in the first video, was for me it comes down to intent. Like the EU authors of mainly the 90s and the early 2000s, they tried their absolute best, to make sure the continuity was adhered to as much as possible. They did the research, they'd email other authors, they'd run stuff past the continuity editors, bloody, bloody, blah. They really, really tried to make sure that this stuff was all as cohesive as possible. And so when things did arise, when problems did arise, it's really easy to forgive, because it's like, well, they've done a really good job. If they've written 100 things and one thing doesn't quite line up and the other 99 do, you've done a really good job of continuity. Then when you have someone come through who's writing a TV series who just does not care about continuity, it doesn't matter what, they're not reading anything, they're not double checking anything. If things do come up through continuity, through the continuity editors, it's like, well, it's my TV show, you can go get. And so we're stuck, I guess, with that problem. For me, is it's the intent.
Oh yes,
it's definitely the intent. When someone has gone out of their way, or not necessarily out of their way, well, rather it's the opposite. They haven't gone out of their way to write this series. They just write whatever on earth they want, and that's where the Clone Wars is as a TV series, and it's a bit, I don't like it.
Well, the other issue with timeline see, the show could have worked if it wasn't meant to be, well, if it wasn't placed where it was on the canon tiers.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because you had, prior to the Clone Wars, you had G canon, which was the movies and anything George Lucas definitively said. You know, anything he said definitively, that was G canon.
Yeah.
Which is why it was G canon that Plagueis was immune, because he said that definitively.
That was him
when the book was being published. And then, of course, you had C canon, which was the majority of the EU. Continuity was that was the goal of this group, you know. Continuity focus here. And if it doesn't line up, we will fix it later, because it lines up now. It might not line up later.
Yeah.
Because some changes are happening due to the movies, but we will fix that if we have to.
Yeah.
You know? And they did their best to make those adjustments.
Well, that's why, again, so little of the prequel era was touched before the prequel movies came out. Just so little of it was touched, because it's like, well, we know full well, or at least what they assumed. It depends on what year we're talking about. They either assumed or straight up knew that the prequels were coming, and so those didn't touch that, you know. And it's just, and again, I guess for me, the two biggest ones that got muddled up was obviously Boba Fett.
Oh yeah,
and I guess that can be partially forgiven, because one, he was such an intriguing character within the EU that people wanted to know his background, so they kept on dropping hints. And there was probably also the assumption that he wasn't going to be a big player in the prequels, because you assume that he's probably a man in his prime in the original trilogy. So therefore, you're talking about a child during the prequels. And there could easily be the assumption made by an author that Boba Fett's just not going to appear in the prequels. He's going to be a kid, you know. How wrong they were. But, you know, but it was an easy assumption to make, because they didn't touch on anybody else, you know. And obviously there is that issue with Greedo, which is probably the only other, I guess, character that got majorly mucked around with from the prequels. But again, it's something you can sort of overlook if you just assume that Greedo was a common name, that all of a sudden cleans up the episode 1 novelization. You have to assume that it's, you know, it's not the Greedo, it's another one. Or his father. I think I've seen a retcon somewhere that was supposed to be Greedo's father in episode 1. And which, you know, I don't know. He's one of those characters that obviously got messed around. But anyway, regardless.
Well, okay, so the discrepancy in that, because they do have an adult Greedo, but they do have they did cast a kid for Greedo that didn't actually make it into the final cut of the movie. I've seen images of the kid in the makeup for Greedo, but I'm like, he's nowhere in the movie. There is another Rodian, who is friends with Anakin.
Wald, isn't it?
Wald. I
he ends up
his name.
Yeah, he ends up getting Watto's workshop after a while, so it's kind of nice. But you know, Greedo is named in the novelization, which I guess is where some of the conflicts turn up. But he was already a character that was conflicted anyway, because, oh my goodness, we're going off topic. There was that short story which covered Greedo's entire life, and I think it pops up in Tales of the Empire. I don't even know which one. No, it must be Tales of Mos. Anyway, whichever Tales of novel it was.
It's hard to remember.
It pops up.
It wasn't Jabba's palace, was it?
I'm feeling. I'm gonna have to go. I'll have to go look.
We'll have to look at this later.
This will annoy me, because there was a short story with Greedo, and while it was probably one of my absolute favorites when I was growing up, like I really, really loved this story, it unfortunately didn't leave an awful lot of room for any more storytelling about Greedo's life, because it followed him as a young kid, isolated from the galaxy on this planet, and then he leaves. He ends up going to Nar Shaddaa for a little bit, and again, pretty much every aspect of his life there is filled in. And then he goes to Tatooine, still very wet behind the ears, or whatever it is that Rodians call those little nubs on top of their head. And he ends up kind of getting conned into trying to kill Han Solo. He's actually not that particularly talented as a bounty hunter or an assassin or anything at all. It's pretty much just a way of killing off. Anyway, I won't spoil why they're trying to kill him for anyone who wants to read that story, but it was a great story. But what it did is it kind of locked in his entire life. And you couldn't tell stories of Greedo going on to do other things or other adventures because it's kind of like he's a kid, he's an idiot, oh, he's dead. And that was all you had. And so when things came out like, I've forgotten the name again, but that comic that was set where, you know, Han Solo and Lando and Greedo are running around trying to get the Yavin Basilica. That's the one, Yavin Basilica. You know, Greedo plays a big part in that, which does not tie into the original story, which episode 1 overlooked. So I guess what we're trying to say in short, before I really hijack this video, is that we were used to overlooking things because they weren't intentional.
Right.
And things got retconned, but they weren't retconned because of a deliberate malicious act. They were retconned because facts weren't known, or in this case, George overrode them in his own works. So
right. But even when he overrode them, it wasn't like a major issue compared to what we're talking about here. Had George done like a major rewrite of, like, because with Boba Fett, all of his stuff was easily fixed. It was all because all the stories about him as about who he was and who he is, it was explained later, oh, these are just stories that have gotten out about him because of the legend that he has crafted with the bounties he's collected. He's a good bounty hunter.
And that's what it is. Yeah, and that wasn't even largely a retcon, because a lot of the time, not all of the time, but a lot of the time when you go back and you look at what was originally written, it was obscure even then. You know, right. Like some say he was a stormtrooper who killed his own officer. You know, like there was just this stuff that was like whispers in a tavern somewhere in a cantina. Right. There's only, I think, it's a Jester Muriel. It's that story where he's actually named as Jester Muriel. That's the only one. Jester Muriel, however we want to pronounce it. That's the one short story that anchored stuff from his past as part of the narration, which is a lot harder to write off. And that's kind of the only retcon. All the rest of them were just characters who had heard things, who had heard rumors, who didn't really know. Right. And so again, as you say, that's not as bad as what some of the Clone Wars stuff was, which is almost it'd almost be the equivalent, I guess, what the Clone Wars did to the Multimedia project, of a new movie taking out a huge chunk of the prequels. And so now episode 1 and episode 2 are only a month apart. Right. And you're looking at it thinking, well, he's 9 here and he's an adult man there, and it's been 2 months. What have you done? You know, you can't just squash those 2 movies together and then somehow explain away how Anakin turned into an adult overnight. You just can't do it. And that's largely what the Clone Wars ended up doing. It took, you know, the Multimedia project, like this long drawn out Clone Wars, and went, and suddenly everything takes apart in 2 months. Like, you can't. Well, you can't do that.
They almost caused another timeline discrepancy in the Clone Wars with Ahsoka. Because her original name was going to be Ashla. Okay, and I don't know if you know this, but there's a little Togruta girl in the youngling scene with Obi-Wan. Her name is Ashla, and essentially that's who she was going to be. Yeah. And it's like, wait a second. Even if it's been a year, or even if it's been 2 years, there is no way that 8-year-old little girl is like now 12.
Yeah, it's like, how quickly did Togrutas grow anyway? I mean, do they just really quickly mature? Is that what's happening? I mean, you could.
How did her skin go from red to orange? Is this normal?
Like, yep, that's what happens. At a certain age, they just bang, they hit puberty. They just go from 9 to 22 in usually half an hour. They're a lot like avocados in that way. It's like, this avocado is too firm, it is too firm, it is rotten. It's just this sudden poof, and if you sneeze, you miss it, and suddenly your Togruta friend is 6 foot tall and an adult. So, yeah, that's what happens. It's canon now. We've established it. We've established what happens. Togrutas are like avocados. You heard it here first. That's a quote you can put on Wikipedia. That's going to be the new opening now. Togrutas, much like avocados. That's what it's going to be.
Oh, dude. Yeah.
Disgraceful.
Yeah.
Who says we leave the topic occasionally? We're on topic.
I mean, technically, we never fully leave the topic. We're always on Star Wars.
That's true, apart from Firefly and avocados. But apart from those little hiccups, we're fine.
Right. But even with the avocados, we were still discussing Star Wars.
That's how it works. Oh, boy. Oh, boy.
Yeah. Well, but again, I think the biggest problem with the comics and the books is Jedi Trial, in relation to the show, because Jedi Trial literally is like if you've been reading the comics, you know that Jedi Trial is taking place. What Obi-Wan's doing something. I'm trying to remember what it was. Well,
it's really toward the end. I mean, it's basically like month 30. You're a couple of months out from the end, which is where Jedi Trial is supposed to be. Yeah, it's supposed to be really close to the end of the war.
It's supposed to be like it's supposed to be like just shy of a year before the end. Because in the comics, it's like when you go through the trade paperbacks, you're going through. It's like this is a 9-volume set, okay, and
it's a lot of comics.
Oh yeah, it's a good chunk.
A lot.
Okay,
yeah,
and it's part way through volume 6 here. I don't know how well that's coming up.
It's showing up pretty
good. The field of battle. Okay, that's where the transition comes in. A good chunk of it. You've still got. I mean, you don't see much of clones in this one. Not too much, but you get down to Forever Young, and that is and you've got the clones here in their phase 1 armor still.
Yep.
Okay, that's just the opening page for Forever Young. And then right after that, on the cover of the next issue, armor. Sorry, I can't see. So
yeah, that's actually pretty on point.
It's like you've got Bly right here with his phase 2 helmet. Okay. Yep. All right.
It does definitely lock in what is supposed to have happened.
Right.
Or where we are on the timeline, yeah.
Yeah. And of course, armor is where, Ayla and Quinn finally meet up after all the rumors about him turning to the dark side and joining Dooku have gone on. And of course, Bly doesn't trust him, but I mean, why would he? No. Okay, yeah, Jedi Trial is supposed to be happening, it's happening like during the time of armor.
But yeah, or probably a bit after. Would it be?
Anyway. It's either during or just after. It's like well, because right after armor, there's it's like the next time you see Anakin, he's a knight, and that's the next issue. That's Dreadnoughts of Rendili, and that's where Obi-Wan and Quinn meet up again.
As I said before, by that point you're like up to issue 670, so it's a long way through. Right. It's a long way through the series before we see Anakin knighted.
Right, and that's just the comics there, and and I mean, there is argument that that Clone Wars, the 2003 show, does have some contradiction with the comics and the novels, but you have to bear in mind it's really just an abridgment of a 3-year-long war. It's not a definitive story. There are definitive stories for certain battles in it. And those are like, that's where the battle is told. For example, you've got so like the Battle of Mon Calamari, it's referenced in the show, but it's not shown because they had a book focused on that, didn't they? It was a book, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's split across multiple media, the Battle of Mon Calamari, and then I guess you've got to say, how long was that bottle? How long was that bottle going for? How long do they bottle the water on Dak? It's that's how they evacuated everyone, in bottles. It's like, how long did that battle actually go for? You know, that's the other thing as well. So, you know, when you've got that problem of, well, it's mentioned as being current in this comic, but it's also mentioned as current in this novel, I was like, well, yeah, they were fighting for months.
Right. And that's the thing. It was a lot of these battles overlap a good chunk because there's a lot.
Well, they weren't waiting.
Right.
They weren't waiting around just saying, are they done yet? No, we can't start the battle here. They're still wrapping it up on the other planet.
You've got battles across the galaxy going on here. The galaxy's almost split in two, even. It's almost halfway through the Republic at a certain point in the story. Of course, you've got Hutt space and the independent planets, and then of course you have the unknown regions. You know, but that's still like, adding all that up together, that's like a third of the galaxy by itself with that are outside the Republic. It's a third of the galaxy.
Yeah, well, I mean, I still liken it, I guess, to history, to Earth history, in that, you know, if you think about something like World War II, the amount of individual battles or events that were happening on any given day on you know, whether it was the East and Western Front or the Pacific, whatever was happening, multiple battles on one day, and that's just one planet, and it's not even the whole planet. It's basically Europe and the Pacific, you know. And there's already enough stories there and enough battles there going on. So if you have that kind of battle going on, but it's across hundreds of planets, thousands of planets, across thousands of systems, it's a lot of battles going on at once. So, I mean, it gives you a great expanse of storytelling, which I think was probably dropped largely by Filoni as well, is that if we had moved away from Anakin and Obi-Wan and started telling some of the other stories of battles that were going on, or maybe even introduced new Jedi, because, you know, there was obviously a lot more Jedi involved than what we've ever seen. The chance to tell some fantastic new stories and to intertwine them with what was already there was largely dropped, because I don't even know what the point was in trying to retell an era that had already been told.
I mean, the show would have been, had they focused on, let's say, Plo Koon.
And
Ahsoka being his apprentice would have been perfect. It would have allowed a perfect timeline consistency, no discrepancies whatsoever. Granted, current canon wouldn't be able to flow properly, though, because they say that if you have an apprentice, you can't be on the council. I'm like, that there are a handful of books and comics that clearly state otherwise.
Yeah, it was like,
sure.
Like that. I was, what? How does that work? Yeah.
You know, it's interesting to me when you go off of the comics with Quinlan Vos. Like, if we're just gonna go with Quinlan Vos, ignoring what we mentioned last time with the personality differentials, if we just go off of his appearance in the show, his one episode, he was given one.
Yep.
I did not even really watch that one because I put it on and I just kind of had it on in the background. I didn't even really watch it.
It's like, at that point, you just given up. It's like, this is nothing like this continuity.
I already knew what the character was going to be like. I'd seen clips before I'd watched the episode. And so I already knew. I was like, this is not Quinlan Vos. This is some weird hippie pretending to be Quinlan Vos. that somehow has the same power.
Yeah.
But even if we ignore the personality problem, when that episode happens, I want to say that's after season 3, so I believe they're in phase 2 armor as far as the characters are concerned. He and it's supposedly, I mean, even if it's after his interaction, after his and Obi-Wan's interaction, when he comes back, if it's after he comes back, even then there's still the issue of how on earth is he running around so freely now, and why is he by himself? Why is there no Thulm around? Because they really they never let, if you go through the comics, he's not alone ever.
No.
After it, the only time he's alone is when he's doing Thulm's work. When he's doing Jedi spy master work. Yeah. when he's doing Jedi shadow work, that's when he's as far at this point in time, Jedi shadows don't really exist. Quinn is probably the closest thing to a Jedi shadow.
Yep.
In the prequel era, because they don't exist after I want to say after Star Wars: The Old Republic. I'm pretty sure they basically die out. The shadows just kind of die out after the Old Republic, after the time period of the game.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a huge gap. There is a huge gap in lore between there and the prequel era, where I guess they feasibly could have popped up at some point, which maybe we would have found out one day if the EU wasn't discontinued. But yeah, You're right. That certainly by the prequel era, certainly by the Clone Wars, it's not a thing.
Right.
Jedi Shadow is not a thing by that point. So
and Quinn is the closest thing that we have, because he's basically a spy, but he's still a Jedi. And Thulm is a very intriguing Jedi Master, I have to say, because he came up with the concept of Jedi spy. It's essentially the same thing that a Jedi Shadow was. I think it's just less. I think it's less risky than what the Jedi Shadows were.
No, definitely
a little
less risky, but.
But yeah, I mean, the only time Quinn's alone is when, and it's one brief. It's a one comic where he has to do this one little thing for Thul, because he's I don't remember what it was, but he's working with an Anzati woman, and Colleen's there, but it's the only time he's working alone. I mean, granted, you could argue, well, he's not alone, he's working with Obi-Wan, but it's it doesn't really make sense for him to be working with Obi-Wan when he was just recently on Coruscant, and the next time we see him, he's nowhere near where he is with Obi-Wan in this episode.
Yeah.
It's like the opposite end of the galaxy. What?
Yeah. What are you doing here? What's going on? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, again, as I said before, it's kind of one thing where obviously someone's just made the decision that we're going to have Quinlan Vos in an episode, but absolutely nobody's even taken a second to think about that in terms of the wider continuity, as well, where should he be at this point?
Right.
What should he be doing? Who should he be with? They're just we just want him in, so there he is. He's in. And
just threw him in.
Yeah, there he is. No other questions ever asked. I mean, I'm certain they didn't even ask if he was alive or dead at the time. If he had died in the comics, which he didn't. Spoiler alert, he doesn't. But if he had died, previously, say in the first year or the first 2 months of the Clone Wars in the comics, I'm sure they would have just flung him in regardless, because no one would have even have checked that. It's kind of, I get the feeling of it's just that kind of lack of care was given to his inclusion. It's like, we want that cool looking dude. Okay, in he goes.
Yeah,
that's just where he was.
Well, and one of the things that I thought was weird was they included Ayla a lot in like a couple of episodes, and it's like, well, if you're going to include Quinn, you should have at least had him in an episode with Ayla. If you're going to do that, at least put them together. Because it's like, I mean, I get it. Yeah, in the comics, even they're separate a lot, but it would have fit better if they had kept them, if they had at least had them together at some point in the story. Because it just, I think it would have been better overall.
Well, their stories are so intertwined. You know, like, as you say, they're alone a lot of the time, but they're just this constantly meshing out. They're apart together, going on. And as you say, if it's going to be his only appearance, you think that you'd put them together, much in the same way that, say, Anakin and Obi-Wan weren't necessarily always together, most of the time, but certainly weren't always together.
Right.
And if you were to have a TV series where feasibly Obi-Wan only gets one episode, somehow, if you were to have him not with Anakin, and you have Anakin in another episode over here, and you had them, you never put them together that whole time, that seems almost like an oversight, you know, really. That is like, you know, I understand that they do have time apart, they have missions apart, that sort of thing, but if you're only going to show them once, show them together, which, by the way, would also be absolutely as nuts as writing a sequel trilogy and never putting the main three characters together in one room. It would be that kind of nuts, but no one would do that, right?
No, it would never happen.
No one would. No, you would never, in your right mind, make a movie where you don't put Luke, Leia, and Han together in one room. So it's that kind of level of bizarreness that obviously no one else would ever stoop to at all.
No.
It's I don't know. Again, I mean, it's. I think the problem is a lot of people are probably going to accuse us of nitpicking, or at least that one person who comments is going to accuse us of nitpicking. And for me, it's kind of like, again,
looking at you, Cal.
It's the sheer number of these sort of problems. You know, like, okay, so Quinlan appears in an episode and Ayla's not with him. Big whoop. Yeah, big whoop, whatever. You know, there's supposed to be phase 1 armor here and then in phase 2 armor. Big whoop. Yeah, it is a big whoop, you know. But when you start piling these things on top of one of another, you know, you come home and there's one spider in the house. Oh, big whoop. There's one spider. If you turn around, there's another spider, suddenly you're in Australia. And it's just like, this is suddenly a big whoop. My house is covered in spiders. This is horrific. But when we discuss them as one-on-one, it sounds like we're being really nitpicky. And we're saying these things. It's like, no, it's the overarching thing. It's the fact that all of this comes together to create this enormous continuity error, to really mess up the timeline in a way that I don't think they could have repaired. I know that Leland Chee was trying towards the end before things got canonized.
He was really trying hard. I give him props for
trying
as hard as he did to make a cohesive timeline with all the discrepancies. I think he practically wrote out like at least 2 books because they couldn't fit. He had to cut them out of continuity altogether, and it hurt him to do that. I know that because he had he literally got hired for this purpose, to make everything make sense. Anything that seemed to be a discrepancy, he was the guy that had to explain it. And he was the definitive guy. He was the guy that you went to and you said, "Hey, keeper of the holocron,
I have a Togruta character. Can I age them rapidly?" And he'll say yes or no. I mean, I guess I should have found the quote before coming on here, actually. But I do recall, and maybe you know, there was a moment where this kind of came up with Leland Chee, and it almost sounded like what he was trying to say is that these episodes were just being pumped out past him, because every other novel and comic the broad strokes was then across to him to say, okay, we're doing this, we're doing that. Well, this makes sense. Do I need to change anything? You know, and he could obviously send back feedback, or George would send back feedback based on that. And that's how you would get comics written. That's how you would get novels written. And what I kind of got from the quote from Leland was that these episodes just going, you know, past him. And he largely was finding out what was happening at the same time as we were watching it on TV. And that's kind of how he found out what was happening with this storyline. So again, it's just one of those things where the level of care seems to have been dropped hugely.
And there was at least one, I know of at least one place. It's when they kill off Eth Koth in an episode, and Leland and Pablo Hidalgo, both of them told Dave, he's already dead. He died in this comic, which takes place before this episode.
Yeah.
George contradicted them and said he never died on screen, so we can kill him. I'm like, George, you literally hired these guys for this. To stop this.
Yeah, continuity has been at the forefront of what you've been doing now for 30, 40 years. We don't just drop it now. It does seem really bizarre.
It's like if you were, for continuity purposes, just to say, as far as the Clone Wars goes, everything happens in the last year and a half. That could potentially work. The only problem, of course, is the phase 2 armor. But you can just say it's so that the casual fans aren't confused. And they're like, okay, yeah, this is the original armor, and we're going to move into the armor we see in episode 3 at later down in the show. And of course,
but surely, and I know this is probably somewhat degrading to a more casual audience, and I apologize if anyone feels that way, but I don't think casual audiences largely would notice a shift in armor anyhow.
It's true. I mean, if you ask my mother, she probably doesn't realize the difference between the costumes or the armor suits. And like, I remember I was discussing something with her about stormtroopers, and she's like, aren't they clones? And I'm like, no, stormtroopers are not clones. They're normal guys.
I mean, feasibly, some clones live long enough to find themselves in stormtrooper armor, but largely speaking, they're normal guys.
Yeah, I mean, the original stormtroopers, the first ones, were a very thorough mix of clones and regular humans.
Yeah,
it was not like, but they were never entirely clones. Except for the 501st, they were clones for as long as possible. That was one thing that I appreciated about Vader.
Keeping the clones as close as he could. Yep.
Yeah.
He
pretty much brought clones into the 501st when other legions were trying to push the clones out. He's like, oh well, they don't want you. Come join my group. I want you to join the elites.
You're the only troops that can actually shoot things properly anyway, so come join me.
Yeah. Right. Which is sad because by episode 5, they're almost all useless. They're almost all because of their aging.
Yeah.
Which is another issue with the new canon.
I'm not even going to ask.
I'm not getting into it. I'm not getting into it. I'm just pointing it out.
Good.
But there aren't too many other significant issues. I think they kill Adi Gallia earlier in the show than she's killed in the comics. She's killed actually after Anakin's knighthood. She's killed in the Obsession arc in the comics.
Yep.
Her death, I got Obsession, and I didn't fully comprehend who all these characters were. That was the only complete comic series, or that was the only complete arc I had when I was a kid.
Mm-hmm.
And reading these comics, that was the only complete part I had. And I'm like I'm having to put 2 and 2 together. I've got the comics and I got Wikipedia. That's all I had for understanding who Asajj Ventress was. And and I had seen and this was before I had seen the cartoon, because I didn't know the cartoon existed yet at this time. And actually I may not have even known about Wikipedia yet. So I was very lost. And
well, actually, I guess that's going to bring me to a second point, but I'll let you finish. But that's a point I was going to make.
But now that I'm older and I've actually read the entire Republic Clone Wars series, and what I know about these various characters, her death in the comics, her death in Obsession, hits me a lot harder than her death in the Clone Wars did. It was because it was so sudden. You were like, oh, she died. Okay, we don't really, we haven't gotten to know her. So what? I mean, you don't get to know her a whole lot in the comics either, but she's significant and you're familiar with her. And then she dies, and you're like, no, Grievous just killed a master on the Jedi Council. Like, what?
Yeah. More importantly, how?
Holy
plot armor, Batman.
Right.
The comics were really fantastic.
They were great.
I joke.
They were great. But that was in the comics, that was his first time killing a Jedi Master from the Council. As far as the comics were concerned. Whereas the show, he's killing masters and losing to Padawans, and it's like, what?
where is this balance here? Yeah,
it's like, come on, how is Ahsoka defeating him, and he's always runs away from Obi-Wan before he ever gets a chance to beat him, and that's another thing about the Clone Wars, that, I mean, they were consistent with Anakin and Grievous. They were consistent with that. Obi-Wan and Grievous were not supposed to meet, except for, you could get away with once. You could have gotten away with one time where they had interacted but never actually fought in a duel. You could have gotten away with that. But the number of time, almost every time they had Grievous, they almost always had Obi-Wan and Anakin in the same episode, and Obi-Wan and Grievous fight a lot in this show. And it's like his boast to Obi-Wan in Revenge of the Sith, I have been trained in your Jedi arts by Count Dooku. It's like,
I am
doesn't
aware.
Know this by now? You've been fighting for 3 years.
It's like, I'm well aware of who. Why do I care? And of course, more importantly, I mean, and this is obviously a George thing for me, but I find that line funny anyway. Particularly that Obi-Wan never gave a retort when Grievous is like, I was trained by Count Dooku, or training your ass by Count Dooku. How Obi-Wan never brought up the fact that, well, I trained the bloke that killed Dooku, so...
He didn't do it... he did it. He does it in the novelization.
But not in the movie. I'm like, George, that just feels like something you drop, mate. Because, with how sassy Obi-Wan is anyway, you really feel like you should have dropped something like that in the movie.
I feel like Ewan would have totally... had that line been there, I feel like Ewan McGregor would have been like, yes, I get to say this. Because he loved being the sassy, he loved the sass.
Yeah, so it's not.
He's a little sassy himself, you know.
Mm.
He is a little bit.
It just felt weird that wasn't in the movie because, like, yeah, it's right there. It writes itself as a line, you know.
It should have been there. It's like, it's like, well, true, but I trained the guy that killed him.
Yeah.
So consider what you're getting yourself into here, Grievous.
Yeah. No,
there are some missed opportunities in the show, in the shows, in the comics, in the movies in particular. There are some missed opportunities, but that's part of why the novelizations exist.
Yes.
You know, I will say the novelization of Attack of the Clones gave me some good insight into characters like Sora Bulq. Like, granted, he's not even mentioned in the Attack of the Clones novelization, but they had him. They created him for one of the background characters in the movie.
Yeah,
and his his arc in the Clone Wars is very intriguing. He is the only one of the Jedi. He's the only Jedi Master to join Dooku for very logical reasons, and yet he initially, he's initially joining because he thinks that this is that the Jedi should be on this side.
Yep.
And you don't even get to see his full fall to the dark side. You just know that he has fallen completely at a certain point. You just know it. You're like, okay, he's a straight up full on dark Jedi at this point. Like he's just killing people now. Like, but like you don't get to see it. You don't get to. And it's like,
and
it's like, I want to see his full fall. Like, I want to understand why this guy fell. That is one thing that I wish they had gotten into a little more. Sora Bulq's character, because he's such an intriguing character. Like, he's one of the best lightsaber duelists ever. Like he's like he's almost the same level as Dooku and Yoda, like as swordsmanship goes. Like, I mean, no one's on the same level as no one's on the same level as Windu. Windu is his own area altogether. But Sora Bulq helped with the development of
Mace's style,
and like, and I love, I don't remember if it was, I don't remember where he says it. I think he says it a couple of times. I think he says it in one of the novels, and I know he says it in one of the comics. He says, Sora Bulq did not master Vapad. Vapad mastered him.
Yep, that definitely is in the comics.
I know it's in the comics, and I don't remember if it's in. I know it's in one of the books. I just don't remember what book it's in. I want to say that it's in I am blanking on the book. We talked
You've
about
got
it
the
last
same
time.
problem.
It's the one where, because it's the one where Mace goes back to Corden Hall to save Dapa. I cannot think of the name of the book.
No,
Shatterpoints.
Yeah.
Man, I'm having a brain fart. That's a serious one.
And I assume it was probably in Shatterpoint, because he would have just fallen at that point too.
Yeah, it was. I think like Sora wasn't in it, but I believe Mace. I believe
chronologically, Sora would have fallen
that point in there. I believe it was in that book. He mentions Sora Bulq, because I remember something about Sora in that book. It's been it's been a few months. So
Sora gets mentioned in pretty much every novel, but again, it's just a mention. It's not like
he even gets a mention in the Revenge of the Sith novelization.
Yeah, just everywhere, just throwing
like they're like talking about Jedi have fallen. Everyone knows the names of Sora Bulq and Depa Billaba. It's like okay, but two entirely different situations and two entirely different falls.
Yeah, Depa is not running around killing everyone in sight.
No, she's comatose.
In fact, quite the opposite. Yeah, it's
not even a full fall for her, really. I wouldn't necessarily say she fell to the dark side. I would say that Corran Hall affected her so much that she lost her sanity.
Mm-hmm.
You know, she really fall to the dark side.
You couldn't say she was a dark entity.
Kind of lost her mind. You know, and it wasn't like the spiritual the bizarre the bizarre situation with the Force on Corran Hall, because the planet, not like the Corrani are like 90% Force sensitive.
Yep.
And like
there are a few species.
Yeah, and it's just like they're very bizarre. They're very different from any other Force powered individuals. They're very different because they don't have the concept of the light and dark that the Jedi do, or any they don't even have they barely have a concept of the Force as anything other than mystical power that they all kind of happen to be able to tap into a little bit. And and of course, like with every group with like this, there's always that there's always that little group of people that can really dig in and open up into
that's how you get Mace Windu
into these powers. Well, yeah, there's that one guy in Shatterpoint that's so like, he's so dark. That guy's so dark. I always forget his name.
In Shatterpoint?
Yeah, I forget what he was, but he was kind of like a shaman.
Yeah.
He was so dark. I was like,
not Car something, was it? No.
Maybe. It's been a bit, and again, I only listened to the book once, and I should get a physical copy and read it.
Go back and listen again.
I mean, granted, the guy, I mean, they got, for the fully unabridged audio, they did a great job with getting the voice actor. He's a really good voice actor, and he does a fantastic job. You really feel like you're listening to Mace Windu during the Mace Windu parts. Granted, it doesn't even sound like Samuel L. Jackson, but you just get.
But it sounds like Mace Windu.
But yeah, like it feel like you just get that feeling that you're really listening to Mace Windu, even though it's all the right words and everything's emphasized in the right way.
Well, Samuel L. Jackson just has an incredibly distinctive voice that's probably really hard to emulate.
Yeah. You just feel like you're listening, like, because during his journal entries, like, you really feel like it's him.
I should probably try and get the audio book. I mean, I really love the novels. I should probably try and get that at some point. Regardless.
Anyway.
Actually, that's a bit that you were saying before, and I was going to quickly latch on to, and now I've completely forgotten what it was, but which isn't good.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. I said I was going to come back to it, and then I didn't. So that's not great. Oh no, actually, I do remember what it was now. I guess one of the other things too with the Clone Wars series, this is just a small point that I was going to make, is that going forward, for anyone who wants to read through the Multimedia project and watch the series in 10, 20, 30, 40 years time, whatever it might be, it's going to be one of the most confusing things that you've ever done. Because for us to be contemporaries of this and to have magazines and blogs and YouTube videos and even just discussions with friends about it, that sort of thing, we can start to find some kind of clarity, or we can start saying, okay, well, I'm going to ignore the Clone Wars series. I'm just going to read the comics and the books. Or I'm going to not read. I'm just going to watch this series and enjoy it, or whatever the case may be for that individual. And we all understand to some degree, whether we hate the Clone Wars or love the Clone Wars, we all understand what's happened.
Yeah.
For someone, but we understand what's happened through external sources. If you're in a cave locked from the outside world, and all you're given is the comics and the books and the TV series, and you've got no other external, sources of media coming into you, it is a mess. At this point, because you just be reading it saying, well, this comic says it's 5 months in, but at this point in the TV, what's going on? Because suddenly the timeline is that out of sync with what is written in the novels, in the comics. You wouldn't know what to do, and that's probably one of the other problems, I guess, that I have with it. Because any other era of Star Wars, no matter what other small niggling bits that may be out of whack, you can read the entire post-Return of the Jedi, all the comics and novels involved, and they all make sense. They're back-to-back. There's no problems with them. And if there are any small little niggling bits, you easily overlooked. Not at all easily overlooked with this. And I think, to me, that creates an enormous issue. Right. It's twofold. One of them, if we were to look at real-world problems, the first one is that the author might have actually asked Lucasfilm in the 90s, hey, when was the Clone Wars? And they said, well, the Clone Wars was 30 years before A New Hope. And they'll say, cool. And they base all of their dates and their ages and their timeline off the Clone Wars being 30 years before A New Hope. And then suddenly when it's bumped right up to like 20 years, you've got a decade now that you can't account for anymore. But that's not their fault. Because they did their due diligence. They went to Lucasfilm and they said, when was the Clone Wars? Lucasfilm said it was then, and they said, okay, thank you very much, and they wrote accordingly. So that's not their fault. And then the second one, of course, is, again, it comes into whether it's narration or the characters, because I might say to you, oh, I started my business 5 years ago, and that's a throwaway line. I started my business 5 years ago, and the line is now out there in the ether. And then for someone who's actually studying my life would say, he started it 7 years ago. Why did he say 5? Well, I said 5 because I've got no concept of time anymore. I'm an adult. Everything has blurred since I was 25. I've got no idea what's going on.
Right.
And the COVID years have really messed me up. I said 5.
They really screwed us up. Like,
yeah. And that kind of thing happens all the time. Like, I might say to you, oh yeah, I left high school 10 years ago. And then I sit down and think about it and go, oh my goodness, it was not 10 years ago. It was way too long ago. Humans distort their own reality of time. And so when a character says, oh, this battle was 2 years ago, and you sort of go, well, actually it was 4. It's like, all right, well, the character thought it was 2. They've had a rough time. And as you say, they've been through a war. And then, of course, the other problem, because I'm always amazed by old people. I've got a neighbor who's like this. And when he's telling stories, it's like, oh, I remember it was 1974. No, it was 75 because Gertrude had just bought this red dress and it looked really good. And we took it down to a picnic in April. And you're like, how do you know this? I don't know what I had for breakfast this morning. How are you maintaining your own internal continuity, you madman? So yeah, that's going to happen all the time in comics and novels when a character says, or one of them was probably Princess Leia, right? In the Thrawn trilogy, when she's first taken to Kashyyyk, and this whole kind of thing of she's never been there before. She passes some comment about how she's never actually seen Kashyyyk before. And then a lot of people say, well, actually, she saw it in The Force Unleashed. So now there's a small continuity error that has been presented. And it's like, well, for a start, she has been to so many planets at this point, sometimes several in a week, going from system to system. For her to not remember in amongst that mess that she's been to this planet before, that's perfectly feasible to me.
Especially when she's under the amount of stress that she's under right now. At this point, it's like, yeah, I'm going to remember the one time I was kidnapped by the Empire, which was only one of like 20 times that that the Empire held me hostage against my father, and I was rescued by this random guy.
And so when she
I don't even know, but somehow his family crest is now the symbol for the rebellion. But I don't remember much of that.
Yeah,
I was 15.
And then she was quickly ushered away into another shuttle and taken off world and never got to see it. It's like, it's not that unusual for her to now be coming back in a more relaxed setting. I mean, she's been chased by some assassins and she doesn't even know who they are, but in the largest scale of things, she's now coming back in a relaxed setting. She's with Chewbacca. She's going to see his family and whatever. And now she can look out of a portal and go, wow, this whole planet's covered in trees. That's bananas.
Right.
No, they're trees.
And the other thing about that time that she was on Kashyyyk when she was 14, 15 years old, she wasn't actually on Kashyyyk. I mean, she was, but she was in an Imperial compound. That doesn't count. No. There are no Wookiees around. All the road trees have been cleared away.
It could have been a compound on any one of a million planets. It's like, again, it's not a massive problem. It doesn't make you just get your novel and go, well, like, it's such a small issue and again, unintentional. Like, I don't think Zahn was supposed to somehow preempt a game that was made 10 years after his novel. He's good. He's not that good. So, it's one of those things. And again, when the people were making The Force Unleashed, I don't necessarily expect them to have then gone back through everything that was written before and found that what is essentially a throwaway line about her just saying, wow, I've never seen this place before. It's a large, again, they tried their absolute best. And these are the sort of things that we find a nitpick. And they're one a novel. When you're going through the EU, you've probably got one of these sort of things a novel. When you're looking at the Clone Wars, to finally bring it back to the topic, it's more than one an episode. Sometimes the entire episode is overwriting what's happened before and makes no sense in the larger scale. So
sometimes it's just a moment in the episode, but a good chunk of the time it's the whole episode, and you're like, how are they going to explain this over here at this point in the timeline when the comic or the book that's supposed to be focusing on this existing battle takes place back here? In some cases, they said, oh, it was actually two separate battles for the same system. And I'm like, okay, but how do we have two battles where the Confederacy has taken over twice? How does the Confederacy take over twice, essentially without any battle, and then the Republic twice reclaims it? How does that work?
And it's the same players, the same commanders, the same generals. The same. The battle plays out blow for blow, exactly the same. It happened twice.
Right. And the only difference is is whether or not somebody died in one of the two. And it's like, but if he died in the book or the comic, it's overwritten by the show, because the show was put above them. Which is, by the way, something else that I have enormous issue with. But there should never have been an extra tier of canon made. There just should not have been. We already had Ewoks and droids and the original Clone Wars series that quite happily sat in C canon. Very happily. Not a problem. Actually, those were S canon.
Oh, come on now. They're C. Don't be silly.
The Ewoks were definitely S canon.
No, they're basically G canon at this point. I love the Ewok series. Go away. I'm going to go get my Ewoks TV series shirt. This is ridiculous. You can't be slapping down my favorite TV show like that.
Hey, I'm not hating on it. I love Clone Wars 2003. I love it. But it is technically S canon. But I love a lot of S canon things. Like the Jedi Prince series, I thought that was really good, and it's S canon. There are a number of things. I love S canon, but I like that it's S canon because there are some things that happen that just don't quite allow for it to make sense continuity wise. Like, for example, I mean, Leland Chee did allow for some things. Like he gave a little more weight to the 2003 Clone Wars because some of the battles were more emphasized. So he gave it a little more weight than most S canon. But one thing that I thought was weird that he included was Anakin was when Anakin and Ventress first fight. She blows up the original Blue Angel, or Azure Angel. Sorry, Azure Angel.
Yeah,
she blows it up, and so they refer. So it's never mentioned in the comics or the books that technically everything after Anakin and Ventress's first encounter, every time that ship's there, that's actually the second Azure Angel, and it's not even the same R4 unit when he's using an R4 unit. It's a different R4 unit altogether.
They just call them all R4. Yeah.
It's like, and I've also been confused by the fact that we have like 4 R4 units, all with R2 domes, and all red.
Well, I mean, there's only a certain amount of colors you can get, and in the middle of a battle, you pop on the domes that you've got. That's all right.
It's just funny to me because like they're all they're all R4s. Fortunately, only one is an R4P. It was actually very common among Jedi to replace R4 and R5 domes or cones with R2 domes because they didn't like the look of the R4 and R5 cone shapes. And I get that. That makes sense. The R4 in particular was weird looking.
Just big, and then there'd be less
weird
drag,
long cone, and it's like flat too. It's like it's not even round like the R5.
It'd give the starfighter extra drag on one side, so you don't necessarily want that.
Right. So it makes sense that they would want to replace that, and they did it a lot. But I mean, in the case of R4P17, she was hardwired into Obi-Wan's ships. She never had full mobility in the course of the Clone Wars. She was entirely hardwired into Obi-Wan's ships. Which is sad.
Which again does make sense though. I mean, when you look at how flat, those ships, come to on the edges, like, can you actually fit an entire unit in there?
I don't know how R2 was fitting in there into those ships. I don't know.
You'd almost think the ship would flip over and just see his little feet sticking at the bottom. Like, it's like, oh, hang, he's not actually in there. He's just sort of clinging on for dear life. He's
I know, right? That would be great.
Completely socketed. Where does he end up being though? Because he ends up being in the middle, I think, on the Azure Angel. I'm trying to think of the actual setup.
The Azure Angel was completely redesigned. Yeah, it's like he took an Aether Sprite, and he like this is the thing that I love about Anakin. He has an engineer's mind. He really does. He's looking at these Aether Sprites, and he's like,
why is it?
Why are we putting the astromechs on one side?
Yeah.
Especially on a ship like this, it's shaped like an arrowhead. It would make more sense to center it, especially when you have that ridge coming up like this. You're going into this straight up arrowhead shape.
It just streamlines it. There's more room, and for the entire body.
Right. And so, and of course, he's added these engines and all this stuff. I think that was the biggest mistake George made. I think the biggest mistake George made was changing Anakin's ship to that yellow starfighter that he had in episode 3. I was like, after going through the comics and stuff and reading some of the books, I'm like, he should have had the Azure Angel, because at least it would maintain continuity, and
it's a properly engineered ship.
Right. It makes sense for Anakin. Well, and it was like, from what I understand, it was hinted somewhere that he wanted to retrofit that he wanted to modify the new ships too, but he never got to. And then when he became Darth Vader, he didn't have the time.
Yeah.
And so he just that's the interesting thing about when he becomes Darth Vader. You never read about Darth Vader modifying anything like Anakin would. But I think
I'm sure he could still appreciate it, though. I can almost imagine Vader during the trench run, like behind these X-wings, just before he shoots, like, see, R2 in the middle, and then shoots them and blows them up. But just at least admiring the fact that the R2 units are in the middle now.
Right. Well, that I thought that, like, when you look at that, at where the astromech units were in the prequels, being on the sides, and then you look at the original trilogy, and in the X-wings and the Y-wings, they're like straight, centered, and it's like, this is where they should be. It makes sense. It's even.
It's the one convention that Anakin managed to bring to the universe.
Right.
And everyone else is like, hey, that makes sense. Although we can't say that, because I mean, the Naboo N1 starfighter, that was socketed in the middle. I guess plenty of other ships were socketed in the middle beforehand.
Well, if you look at the Azure Angel, it seems to me that Anakin was kind of influenced by the N1 a little bit. If you look at it,
surprising.
I mean, you know why it's called the Azure Angel, right?
Well, Padme,
yeah, because Padme's his angel, and he painted it blue.
Yeah. Yep. It's straight up after Padme. Yep.
Though technically, the first one, the first one was the one that was actually Azure in the blue tone, because the second one was darker. And it's like, that's not really Azure. That's more of a deep blue.
Yeah, but the navy blue angel just doesn't sound as nice, does it? Really?
It does not.
No, you can't have that.
No.
Heavens above. Yeah, no, it's, I don't know. There's I mean, again, I guess the fact that we keep going off topic is just because the EU is just so much fun to explore around.
It is
probably pretty good, because I think this is a second video we've tried to do on the Clone Wars and how bad it is, and instead we end up talking for 2 hours about how great the rest of the EU was. So,
it's true. It's true.
It's kind of good.
I know.
It's kind of good. I
mean,
what's going to happen?
One other thing I wanted to bring up.
Yields.
I just forgot, and I forgot what it was.
Good. Well, I'll entertain everyone with a dance while you think about it.
What was it?
Are you not entertained? Are you not entertained?
I don't know. What was it? Ventress. Okay, so not
had a much better arc in the comics.
I mean, even if you were to accept the whole Dathomir arc and changes that happen because of it, I seriously want to find out who wanted to do this arc and why it came up. Like, I believe it had something to do with George wanting to bring Darth Maul back, and I think it had something to do with that. But
surprise,
we'll come into that later. Well, on part 3 probably.
Yeah,
because this is gonna be a series. Like, there's no way this is just gonna end here. We can't end here.
There's just so much more juicy stuff.
Right. We'll probably end it. It'll be 3 or 4, and we'll probably end there and talk about something else next time.
It'll end up going for longer than the Clone Wars series actually went. That's what's going to happen.
Yeah. We'll go 10 years. That would be horrible. Anyway, so with Ventress, Obsession. It was because I brought up Obsession. That's why I wanted to talk about Ventress. Obsession and the Dathomir arc, as well as all of Ventress's later appearances in the Clone Wars show, they're totally contradictory.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I mean, even when, like, if you think about when Anakin and Ventress fight, like, that's when she dies. Unless you're going to move Obsession, and of course you have to change some of what happens in Obsession.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You have to move Obsession to before you have to move essentially everything except for what happens with Quinlan Vos. You have to, in order for the adjusted timeline that they gave to make sense, you have to move everything up to Obsession and then work around the Quinlan Vos stuff outside of it, because it's the only thing that's entirely different. Everything from Obsession back has to be moved into that entire window from where the Clone Wars begins, the show. Like, it has to go right from there. Like, if you don't include Obsession, it screws up it screws it up, because it's like, where did Anakin get his scar? That's the one thing they never explain outside of that one comic. They give him the one comic. It's not explained in the show. Like, they don't give it to you in the show. I was hoping, I was like, oh, maybe it'll open up, because, like, I saw previews and I saw, oh, Anakin already has a scar. I wonder if they're gonna have, you know, because I saw the movie, and then I was like, I wonder, are they gonna go back in the timeline over the course of the show, and show us that fight again? Yeah. No, they're not. I was like, come on.
Yeah. And I mean, the thing is too, is that's another thing with the original Clone Wars series, is like, you know, George mentions that directly in the DVD commentary on episode 3. Like, that gets directly references why the scar is there. And so it does seem weird, as you say, that it kind of never got referenced again in what's supposed to be the quintessential Clone Wars series. It's supposed to be the overall encompassing, explaining it. Like, how did that get dropped? What happened?
And they made references to things that were in the comics too. I was like, what? Like, and granted, they changed them, but they made references to stuff, and it's like, why?
Largely by accident, most likely. It's absolutely accidental.
Right.
That's all, because there just doesn't seem to be much consideration given to the previously established continuity. So any correlation between this series and what had happened before is probably an accident, to be honest.
Oh, I agree.
You know, I agree. It's probably an accident, or of course, the other thing as well, I've always got to remember, is it's not like Filoni was sitting there writing every episode, directing every episode, designing everything from the ground up. I mean, there's an enormous team behind this, and all it takes is one other fan who's either, you know, part of the writing team or part of the design team or whatever it is that's on there, who's like, you know, we're going to slip this reference in because that's a battle that happens. So
Well, and the thing is that I don't entirely blame Dave. I mean, I think
mostly blame Dave.
Yeah, I mostly blame him. I think I kind of badmouthed him a little bit in the last video. So
go again. 2 for 2. Come on.
I mean, it's not. I mean, I don't entirely blame him. Yes, I consider it mostly his fault, but but it's not entirely his fault. He is not 100% to blame. His influence was only so much. Granted, yes, he technically had most influence, but
in all the years since, the only thing I can say there is in all the years since, he's taken all the accolades for it. Whenever someone says that they love the Clone Wars, or they love this character, or they love this episode, or they love this series, or they love this season, whatever it is that they loved about it, the accolades go squarely towards him every single time. It's not like they actually, mention the assistant director or one of the writing staff or whoever else. He gets all the. So if he's going to get all the accolades, he can get all the muck flung at him as well. Because if he's going to say that, that was all me, it's like, well, this was all you.
One thing I did appreciate about the series was that Katie Lucas made sure that the show discussed the government that the Confederacy created for itself.
Yep.
Granted, it was clearly a sham government that Dooku made to make the Confederates feel like they had some say, but it wasn't a real government. And it was secretly a Sith government that was just being used temporarily because it just needed to be done. And I appreciate that she did that, like, that was Katie. I know that for a fact. She wrote most of those episodes that had those references. I wish that stuff had been gone into more in the books or the comics. Even the comics kind of reference it loosely. I don't know so much with the books, but my understanding is it's not really touched on a whole lot in those either.
Yeah, I mean, the comics in particular, I guess you got a problem that comics only have a certain amount of panels to tell their story, and they've got to kind of keep it pretty engaging. And if you and particularly in a single issue, what's an issue? 15, 18, 20 pages. If you suddenly set aside 5, 8, 10 pages of that just for the setting up of a government, it's not particularly engrossing comic.
You're gonna lose the reader.
Yeah, because particularly when they're single issues, because when they're released as these single issues, each single issue needs to be compelling in its own right, or you risk people not buying the next issue in the series. So I can see probably why the comics didn't touch on that very much. Novels have a bit more leeway in that respect. You can just go off on a 1 chapter or a 2 chapter sojourn into how this government was formed and what's going on, or cleverly intertwine it. But yeah, the comics I can forgive. Novels, what's going on, guys? You've dropped the ball again. But at least, someone, as you say, that's something we can appreciate. So if we're going to, we said a good thing. We said a good thing about it.
Right. I did. I did.
We found the good thing.
Right. It went into the political side of the Confederacy because they needed something. Like, you can't just have, you can't focus, you can't just keep saying, oh, the Confederacy is evil. It's like, well, no, they're not fully evil. A lot of them are doing what they think is right.
Yeah.
And people don't seem to be, and people seem to misinterpret that a lot because of the show, because, the movies are very one-sided. And
when you've got a galaxy that was getting along fairly well before, obviously particularly Mon Calamari, for instance, we already know that those are generally in broad terms are good people.
Oh yeah.
And so to suddenly suggest that an entire planet is full of evil people, where previously only 10 years before they were a part of the Republic and everything was fine.
Right.
Obviously, as you say, they are largely good people who think they're doing the right thing, who are just being manipulated. So
and that's a good example.
They still want a voice.
Like that's a good example of
government.
I mean, granted, you could make an argument about any historical civil war. A good chunk of the time, apart from the people in charge, most of the time, the people fighting in the war are, trying to form the alternative government. They're all most of these people think that they are doing the right thing.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, it's not for me to say in these cases who was right or wrong.
I think what you actually maybe want to do is reread the comics yet again before the next thing, because I've got them all there.
Right.
They're all sitting there.
Right.
And what was it that the other thing too that I should probably go through is the letters of the editor at the end. At this point, Dark Horse didn't necessarily put one at the end of every comic issue, but most comic issues still had one. So it could even be worth trawling through those, because occasionally you find some real good bits of info just randomly shoved at the back of a comic. So
yeah,
I
really liked when Jan Duursema was working on was one of the primary people for Dark Horse. I liked her, her a lot, and she does like she hates the current stuff. She refuses to like. They tried to get her involved in the Marvel stuff, and she was like, "No." I was
surprised and a little bit delighted that she did actually come back for 108, though. That was one of the draw cards for me there. So she was at least happy enough to come back and do a few panels for Marvel, but that was, again, 108. So it was Legends. As much as I hate that term, it was Legends that she came back for. So
none of us are. Most EU fans are not a big fan of the term Legends.
No,
we're not.
For reasons that are way too numerous.
I mean, yeah, I put Legends in these titles because I'm not trying to just get EU fans. I'm trying to get people to view this and to understand where we're coming from here. It's not it's not entirely that we hate the show. Please don't think that it's entirely that we hate the show.
I do. Well, hold on. I do.
Because the show,
count me in this.
Like if the multimedia project had never happened, it probably would, like, a lot of people who don't like the show would probably like it.
It'd be slightly more palatable. I mean, there'd be some things that I'd still have a hard time overlooking, such as like brain chips or whatever. That was still
I agree. Weird. I agree.
And even even the whole idea of Anakin having an apprentice, if you were to again scratch the entire EU and pretend it never happened, going into episode 3 where there's this problem of we grant you the rank of master, but you don't get, rather we don't, but have a seat. It's kind of weird that never came up in discussions, either in the council chambers or as he walks out with Obi-Wan. He's like, but what? I mean, I've trained an apprentice. What's going on here?
Right.
So it's weird that would never come up. So those are two things that in a vacuum where the multimedia project never existed would still raise an eyebrow with me. But I guess, as you say, most of the contradictions are not contradictions if there's no multimedia project. So
right. Well, and that's the thing. Like the show had good arcs. It had good ideas, and to some degree, I will agree that Anakin becomes more palatable on screen through the Clone Wars. I liked him. I actually like him better in the books and comics because I get to I feel I understand his thought process and where he's coming from in those, because he's very clearly, he doesn't understand why Jedi are so detached. And in the Jabim arc, it's very clear most of the Padawans who have lived their entire lives in this feel stagnated by the way that the Jedi Order is. They feel like there are three couples that are like secretly dating, and you're like, wait.
But again, I guess that's one of those things that seems to have been going on this entire time. I don't think, as much as we didn't see a lot of galactic history after, say, the Old Republic and up until the prequels, there's a massive gap there which we don't get to see an awful lot of.
Yeah,
it'd be certainly
little sections.
Yeah, it'd certainly be my understanding that the young Jedi of the Clone Wars era don't necessarily exist as an unusual thing. I would probably say that it seems largely for this entire time, as much as they've been like, no attachments, you guys can't be doing what you're doing. Going on behind their back seems to be a massive thing. Same as a rule of two. I mean, you show me a Sith that actually adhered to the rule of two. It's just one of those things that never got adhered to. Everyone had these secret apprentices hiding in some orifice somewhere that just, I have another apprentice. And the same for the Jedi. As much as the Jedi doctrine at the top is like, okay, so you guys can't be having relationships, you can't be having partners, and stop that, naughty, stop that. Clearly they're doing it, and I would say that's been happening the whole time.
Yeah, I mean, you go into Star Wars: The Old Republic. I mean, there's a whole Like the Grand Master of the Jedi Order has a kid.
Yeah.
Granted, she has nothing to do with this kid, which I'm having I still have trouble understanding that whole thing. But ignoring the complications of that,
kid.
Like she had a relationship, she had a child. Granted, she's the child of another Jedi who wasn't supposed to have a child anyway. So,
and it just seems to be this ongoing. And then even well before the Clone Wars, was a problem, or even a rumble. Qui-Gon's had his own, love interest, not a relationship, but there's obviously love interest in Obi-Wan. Of course, every second week found somebody to be infatuated with, and again, I'm sure they're not unusual. Then they're not just these one-offs. It's like, oh, well, for some bizarre reason, after 1,000 years of remaining celibate, the Jedi Order suddenly discovered the opposite sex. It's almost like for this entire time, this has been going on, and whether they decided to pursue their attractions or just admit that they have feelings and then keep them buried, or whatever it is that they've decided to do beyond that point, it's pretty obvious that the Jedi Order functionally was still very much having relationships, having love interests, having that sort of thing. And it's just that while they were told not to, they were. They were.
I mean, Plagueis even acknowledges it. He's kind of explaining why he himself has never married to some degree. I mean, granted, he's a Sith. It's like, imagine marrying someone and being this dark side entity. Like, it's like, how awkward would that be to just your wife would have to be an acolyte of some sort. Like you couldn't just she'd have to at least, and so his explanation is why would we partner with non-Force sensitives? That's why the Jedi restrict marriage by dogma. He's like what, whereas we have no specific rules, but we just don't generally marry, because for us, why add more potential competitors, through our own seed? When there are plenty sitting
there's
in front of
competitors
us,
lining up out the front,
right.
But mind you, though, you have just made me think that that'd be an amazing sitcom, just Darth Plagueis and his wife, and he's just trying his best to hide everything from his wife and come home and have a normal relationship, come home from work and just have a nice little dinner and maybe watch another episode of something and feed the cat and go to sleep at a decent hour and then wake up and go back to plotting murder. But just trying to keep it from us.
That's how I think Vectivus was.
Yeah, very much so. How was your day? How was your day at work, dear? Oh, it was
good. But yeah, we're pretty much wrapping up here. So
yay.
Yeah. All right. So so that was our timeline discussion.
Rant.
Ranting over ranting over ranting over ranting.
And at some points there, we actually did mention the Clone Wars directly. So, there's that. Yeah. That's good.
Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, of course, some of this is edited. So, there were some of the longer parts where we went off, we are cut down or cut out completely. So
I can tell everyone at home that we've been chatting now for 17 and a half hours. He's probably going to cut it down to more like 1.5. So that's probably what you're going to see. But it has been 17 and a half hours. I was clean shaven when we started recording. If you guys go back now and have a look at the beginning, I was clean shaven. So yeah, because we both were. In fact, we were both.
We've never stopped talking. The part one is actually just when we started talking about the Clone Wars. We were talking about Star Wars in general before that. Yeah, we just weren't recording it.
I've got the police doing wellness checks at my door. My family haven't seen me in 7 weeks. We've just been here talking about Star Wars.
It's been a long time. We were, I've had people over to my house in this time.
And we were still just talking. They're off to the side, just like, what is he doing?
All right. Well,
Until
thank
part
you for
3.
watching, guys. And Jeff, again, thank you for being on here with me.
No, all good.
Part
3 will be fun.
For another Clone Wars discussion.
Yep.
Yeah. Hopefully we can have. Hopefully we only have 1 or 2 more Clone Wars discussions, and then we can move on to other Star Wars content and Firefly eventually. We really should do Firefly, because that's something that you and I can really talk about, because there's only so much that exists. I mean, if we want to, we can talk about the comics and the books a little bit, but I know very little about those. So, okay. Well, because we're having technical difficulties, guys, I'm just going to say goodbye. And I hope you guys have a good time. And I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Seriously, may the Force be with you, and have a good night. And there is Grand Admiral Thrawn. Okay, bye, guys.